Hello again everyone, welcome to our first video lesson on Frankenstein. You are studying Frankenstein as part of paper 2, the prose module, where you'll be comparing it with another novel. You've looked at the Gothic, and today we're going to start thinking about the Romantic movement and the Enlightenment era. Before you go any further with this lesson, make sure you've completed the first lesson on the Gothic and have got that work in front of you with a red pen in hand ready to add to it now. You listed 5 conventions of the Gothic genre. Well, let's have a look at what you could have put for that. They have an obsession with the darker impulses and aspects of humanity. They use what psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud would call the uncanny, that feeling of something not quite right. They use the sublime, and they're fascinated with the terror that nature causes. There are themes of wilderness, remoteness, and isolation or imprisonment, perhaps pertinent to our current situation. And finally, brilliant quotation from John Bowen: "In Gothic novels, the past erupts in the present and deranges it." There are, of course, lots of other things you could say about the Gothic genre, but we're going to take that final point from John Bowen, the eruption of the past into the present, as our starting point for today. That quote suggests a kind of tension that is inherent in the Gothic, and it's that same tension that we see between the Romantic literary movement that Mary Shelley was writing as a part of and the Enlightenment period, that period of scientific and social progress that was in the background to all of her writing, and especially in the background to Frankenstein. Here's the thing about the Enlightenment. We slightly ruin it for you at GCSE in English by telling you that people like William Blake and Wordsworth, they were responding against the Enlightenment. So we teach you from day one that it's something to be reacted against, but actually it's the beginning of the kind of life that you enjoy today. So it's a period of enormous scientific advancement. Rationality and logic for the first time become the guiding principles of life and human existence. You've got the discoveries of Copernicus, Galileo and Newton, which seem in some way to underpin this new way of thinking. But alongside these scientific discoveries, you've got social advances symbolised by works like Rousseau's The Social Contract and the Declaration of the Rights of the Man and the Citizen, these documents that form not only the basis of the French Revolution and the grab for rights for humans there, but more broadly for an understanding that you as an individual have rights. So here's the Enlightenment, famously symbolised by Isaac Newton's apple and the discovery, of course, of the rules and the laws of gravity. It's incredibly rational, it follows the rules of physics. Now, those became a kind of new gospel for the Enlightenment era. If it was answerable to the scientific process, it could be true. If it wasn't answerable to those rules, then it was abstract, it was airy-fairy, it was a little bit intangible. With this new understanding of the Enlightenment era, I'd like you to pause the video and now to write a paragraph explaining how were Gothic values different to those of the Enlightenment. Refer back to the homework you previously did in the start of this video on the Gothic to draw out that comparison. Did you find any surprising similarities between the Gothic and the Enlightenment? Well, while the Gothic and Romantic are different movements in terms of the literature they produce, there's a lot of crossover there, and the big thing that the Gothic and Romantic have in common is that they are a reaction against Enlightenment values. As you've studied the Romantics a lot before and continue to study them for your A-level literature, we don't need to spend too long reminding ourselves of the key features, but in brief summary, the Romantics were all about reconnecting with nature. They were fascinated by the innocence of children. They had a morbid obsession with death and a really fascinating interest in the different understandings of the afterlife. They were obsessed with emotional truth and believed, of course, that human motivations aren't necessarily logical. And then finally, this is where there's a really interesting crossover with the Enlightenment period, they believed in the role, agency and power of the individual. Here then is the Enlightenment period. Let's introduce into the equation the Romantic movement. You can see they're very different, are they not? But just as these two are fruit, the two movements, Romantic and Enlightenment, fundamentally do share the common thing that they are both fascinated by the individual. Both come from this moment in time, from the 17th century onwards, when individual human beings gained agency, gained power, gained rights, gained all the other things we've talked about. Pause the video for task number 2 now. What do the Romantic movement and the Enlightenment period share in common? I'd like you to write a paragraph explaining your thoughts. It's that individuality which Mary Shelley is particularly interested in her novel Frankenstein, both as an Enlightenment idea but also as a romantic one. And like this delicious raspberry, apple and lemon smoothie that I've got here, of course raspberry represents the Gothic, apple the Enlightenment, and lemon the Romantic movement, Frankenstein is a blend of these three movements, which, well, it's not so bad, come together, oh, it's a bit tart, come together to explore this idea of individuality through those three different lenses. It's about time that we started reading the book, and we're going to start with the letters that Captain Walton writes to his sister. There are 4 letters at the very start of the book which introduce it, and you are going to read them. You are going to find the Romantic, you're going to find the Gothic, and you're going to find the Enlightenment in what Walton tells his sister of his journey in the Arctic. If you have a physical copy of Frankenstein, have it in front of you now, and you can be taking annotations straight onto the page. I'd recommend in pencil, so you can add to them, change them, adapt them later. If, on the other hand, you've not, and I appreciate in current circumstances you might not have a copy of Frankenstein to hand, then use the Project Gutenberg version, a link to which is in the description of this video. Now let's read the opening of the story together. The novel begins with letter 1 from Captain Walton to his sister Mrs. Saville. We know he sent it from St. Petersburg in Russia, and we know the year is 17 something, but there's an air of mystery around which year. You will rejoice to hear that no disaster has accompanied the commencement of an enterprise which you have regarded with such evil forebodings. I arrived here yesterday, and my first task is to assure my dear sister of my welfare and increasing confidence in the success of my undertaking. Notice, as I have highlighted here, the Gothic tone created by words like no disaster and evil foreboding. We've got the double negative of no disaster, and the foreboding, foreshadowing of the word foreboding. Both of these imply that, okay, nothing bad's happened yet, but it's only a matter of time. This is a Gothic novel from the very first sentence. But then there's equally the semantic field of the Enlightenment here. An enterprise sounds both like a business venture, but also something like a voyage of discovery that Captain Walton, is going on. And then finally, in this same opening paragraph, we've got the introduction of the Romantic idea of the individual, the success of my undertaking. Walton is clearly driven by a desire for individual glory, and that's a really romantic idea at heart, the individual standing head and shoulders above his peers. So there we go, that's how I would annotate the opening few sentences of letter 1 from Walton to his sister. What you're now going to do is read the first 3 letters of the book, and you are going to continue annotating in the same way for looking for the Gothic, looking for the Enlightenment, and looking for the Romantic. That cocktail of all 3 makes Frankenstein uniquely intriguing to its reader at the very opening. So I hope you enjoy the opening to the novel. If you need a little extra to do whilst you're reading it, there are 3 intertextual references to other texts included in the opening 3 letters. Have a look for them. Can you spot them? We'll have a discussion of them in one of our future upcoming lessons. Stay well. And if you want to know how to make one of these delicious Frankenstein smoothies, it's very, very simple. Chop up your apple really, really fine. If you're lucky to have a smoothie maker, well, you know how to do this already. If you're not like me, just mash it with whatever you can get your hands on. Add in a bit of yogurt, some lemon, not too much, you don't want it to be too tart, and then for that really Gothic texture, chuck in some raspberries at the end. It's not bad, to be perfectly honest.